Marcus's violin career had ended 3 years ago when he lost his leg in an IED explosion. Now he was just a former soldier trying to make ends meet in the New York subway. But tonight, when 4 terrorists entered the metro, they would learn that Marcus's true expertise wasn't music. It was turning sound waves into deadly weapons. The morning rush hour at Times Square subway station was a symphony of chaos that Marcus Chen had memorized down to the last note. At exactly 6:00 a.m., he descended the concrete steps with his violin case in one hand and folding chair in the other, his prosthetic left leg creating a distinctive rhythm against the tile floors. 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days of the same routine had taught him to read the underground currents of humanity flowing through New York's arteries. Marcus positioned himself in the northeast corner of the downtown platform, the same spot he'd claimed since his first day busking. The acoustics here were perfect. Not that the commuters hurrying past would ever realize why. To them, he was simply another street musician, a disabled veteran trying to make ends meet through classical performances. They saw the obvious signs, the careful way he favored his left leg, the worn military-issue jacket he wore regardless of season, the practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. What they didn't see was how those eyes catalogued every architectural detail of the station, the way sound reflected off the curved ceiling tiles, the resonance patterns created by the tunnel openings, the precise mathematical relationship between wall spacing and frequency amplification, details that would mean nothing to a civilian, but everything to someone who had spent 12 years turning sound into a weapon. Marcus opened his violin case with practiced efficiency, revealing an instrument that appeared unremarkable to casual observation. The wood showed appropriate wear for a musician of modest means, and the strings had the slightly dulled gleam of equipment that was well-maintained but aging. Hidden beneath the worn velvet lining, sophisticated electronics remained dormant, disguised as spare strings and sheet music. To any inspection, it looked like the belongings of a street performer. In reality, Marcus carried more advanced acoustic warfare technology than most military units would ever see. The first commuters began arriving at 6:15, their footsteps creating the opening percussion of another day's performance. Marcus lifted his violin and began with Bach's air on the G string, the familiar melody floating through the station like morning mist. His technique was flawless. Years of military precision had seen to that, but he was careful to introduce just enough imperfection to maintain his cover. A slightly trembling hand on long notes, the occasional hesitation that suggested age and injury rather than calculation. Dr. Sarah Martinez was among his regular audience, a hospital administrator who caught the 6:45 train to Mount Sinai every weekday. She always dropped a $5 bill into his case, accompanied by the same warm smile and brief nod. What she didn't know was that Marcus had identified her 3 months ago as a potential asset, someone with medical knowledge who might prove useful if his other life ever intersected with his current one. "Beautiful morning for music," Dr. Martinez said as she did every Tuesday, her warm smile accompanying the familiar $5 bill. "Every morning's beautiful when you can still make music," Marcus replied, giving her the same response he'd offered 47 times before. It was both true and a perfect lie. Music had indeed saved him, just not in the way she imagined. The IED that destroyed his leg in Helmand Province had also ended his official military career, but it had done something else entirely. It had given him the perfect cover identity. Marcus Chen, the disabled veteran street musician, was a creation born from real tragedy and carefully crafted deception. The Army's Acoustic Warfare Division didn't officially exist, and when it was quietly disbanded 3 years ago, Its personnel had simply vanished into civilian life with new identities and very generous disability benefits. Marcus continued playing as the morning crowd thickened. Business people hurried past, clutching coffee cups and cell phones. Tourists studied subway maps with the intense concentration of people navigating foreign territory. Construction workers heading to job sites carried the easy confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going. All of them contributed to the acoustic environment Marcus monitored without conscious thought. At 7:30, something changed. It started with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who rode the train to visit her daughter in Brooklyn every Tuesday. She descended the steps more quickly than usual, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder with an expression Marcus recognized from his deployment years. Fear, barely controlled and trying to hide itself. Then came David Kim, a college student who always wore noise-canceling headphones and barely acknowledged the world around him. Today, his headphones hung around his neck, and his eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd with the hypervigilance of someone who sensed danger but couldn't identify its source. Marcus's fingers never faltered on the violin strings, but his mind shifted into tactical analysis mode. Something had changed the behavioral patterns of his regular commuters. The alteration was subtle, the kind of thing a civilian might dismiss as morning stress or coffee jitters. But Marcus had spent years reading the micro-signals that preceded violence, and every instinct he possessed was beginning to whisper warnings. What the commuters didn't know was that they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of what a street musician could really do. The confirmation came at 7:42 a.m. in the form of 4 men descending the stairs together. Their coordination was the first giveaway. Normal commuters moved independently, following individual rhythms and destinations. These 4 moved as a unit, their spacing and positioning too precise to be coincidental. Marcus noted their tactical formation without breaking his musical concentration. Diamond pattern, maximum coverage of sight lines, positions that controlled all primary exit routes. The second indication was their clothing. Heavy winter coats despite the mild October weather, worn in a way that concealed bulk without obviously doing so. The bulges were positioned exactly where someone would carry concealed weapons, and the fabric hung with the particular weight that suggested body armor underneath. But it was their eyes that confirmed Marcus's assessment. They moved with the systematic scanning pattern of trained operators, cataloging threats and opportunities with professional efficiency. These weren't random criminals or even typical terrorists. They had military training, organization, and a plan. What they didn't know was that they had just walked into the hunting ground of one of the military's most dangerous specialists. Marcus transitioned seamlessly from Bach to Pachelbel's Canon in D, a piece that would give him 23 minutes of performance time while he assessed the developing situation. The men had spread out across the platform, taking positions that blocked all escape routes while maintaining visual contact with each other. Their communication was subtle, but visible to someone who knew what to look for. Brief hand signals, adjusted postures, the slight movement of lips that suggested subvocal radio communication. The tall one with the scar across his left cheek, Marcus designated him Alpha, seemed to be in command. He positioned himself near the information booth where he could observe the entire platform while maintaining clear lines of sight to his team members. Beta and Gamma flanked the main stairways, while Delta covered the tunnel entrance where trains arrived and departed. Marcus continued playing while his mind calculated tactical possibilities. 200 commuters filled the platform at current density. The station's layout offered limited escape options: 2 staircases to street level, and the train tunnels themselves. If these 4 were planning what Marcus suspected, they had chosen their location with professional expertise. Alpha spoke briefly into a concealed microphone, the movement barely visible but unmistakable to someone trained in surveillance detection. The others acknowledged with minute changes in posture. Marcus recognized the communication pattern from his own military experience. These men weren't acting independently. They were part of a larger operation with external coordination. The attack began at 7:47 a.m. Alpha moved first, walking casually toward the center of the platform while maintaining the relaxed demeanor of a commuter waiting for his train. When he reached the optimal position, equidistant from all exits with clear lines of sight to his team, he stopped and reached inside his coat. Marcus's muscle memory took over before his conscious mind finished processing the threat. His left hand shifted position on the violin's neck, adjusting string tension in a way that would alter the instrument's harmonic properties. To any observer, it looked like normal tuning. In reality, Marcus was preparing his primary weapon system for deployment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alpha announced, his voice carrying clearly across the platform as he revealed an assault rifle. "Please remain calm and follow instructions. This platform is now under our control." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Screams erupted from the crowd as people began to panic. Some ran toward the staircases, only to find their paths blocked by Beta and Gamma, who had produced their own weapons. Delta sealed off the tunnel entrances, completing the containment. Marcus continued playing Pachelbel's canon, as if nothing had changed. The contradiction was so absurd that several people near him stopped panicking to stare. A man with an assault rifle stood 30 feet away, and the disabled street musician was still performing classical music with the same serene concentration he showed every morning. "You!" Alpha called out, pointing directly at Marcus. "Stop playing and move with the others." Marcus looked up with the confused expression of someone struggling to comprehend an impossible situation. "I'm sorry. What's happening?" "Put down the violin and join the group," Alpha repeated, gesturing toward where he was herding the other hostages into a compact cluster near the platform's center. "Oh," Marcus said, as if the reality of the situation was just penetrating his awareness. "Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't understand." He began to carefully pack his violin back into its case, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone whose disability made quick movements difficult. The terrorists' attention shifted to crowd control as Marcus played his role. They were professionals, he realized, watching their coordination and equipment. Military training, probably special forces background from somewhere in Eastern Europe, based on their accents and tactical methodology. But they had made one critical error in their threat assessment. They had dismissed him as a non-threat the moment they saw the prosthetic leg and violin. Marcus finished packing his instrument and joined the group of hostages now clustered in the platform's center. Alpha began outlining demands: political prisoners to be released, aircraft provided for escape, the standard terrorist negotiation template. Marcus listened with half his attention while the other half catalogued the acoustic properties of their current tactical situation. 200 hostages created a specific sound profile. Breathing patterns varied with stress levels. Heart rates affected blood flow and created subtle acoustic signatures. The rustle of clothing, the shuffle of feet, the whispered conversations, all of it combined into what Marcus's trained ear recognized as a perfect acoustic warfare scenario. The violin case rested beside his feet, looking innocent among the scattered purses and briefcases of other hostages. Inside, hidden within what appeared to be spare violin strings, lay technology that had taken the Army's Acoustic Warfare Division years to develop. Microspeakers capable of producing precisely calibrated frequencies, signal processors that could analyze and manipulate sound waves in real time. sonic weapons disguised as musical equipment. Marcus had been the division's leading specialist for 8 years before the IED ended his official career. While other soldiers trained with bullets and explosives, Marcus learned to weaponize sound itself. Specific frequencies could disorient enemies, disrupt electronic equipment, or cause temporary paralysis in human targets. In the right hands, sound became more devastating than any conventional weapon. The irony wasn't lost on him. These terrorists had captured a platform full of civilians and one of the military's most dangerous acoustic warfare specialists. They just didn't know it yet. But they were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a room doesn't look threatening at all. And what Marcus was about to unleash would redefine their understanding of warfare itself. Alpha was explaining how the hostage situation would proceed when Marcus made his first move. He reached into his violin case, ostensibly to retrieve something, but actually activating concealed equipment. To anyone watching, he appeared to be nervously fidgeting with his belongings. What he was really doing would have terrified them if they had understood the science behind it. The initial frequency was subtle, just below the range of human hearing, but powerful enough to begin the process that would destroy these men's ability to function. Marcus had learned something in Afghanistan that these terrorists were about to experience firsthand. Something about how the human mind responds to frequencies it cannot consciously detect. The effect would build gradually, but when it reached full intensity, even the most hardened killers would find their confidence mysteriously shattered. Alpha paused mid-sentence, frowning slightly as if trying to remember his next point. Beta shifted uncomfortably, unconsciously adjusting his grip on his weapon. The frequency was working, creating low-level psychological pressure that would gradually escalate their stress responses. Marcus adjusted the output, increasing amplitude while keeping the frequency below the conscious threshold. The hostages began to feel it too. A vague sense of unease that couldn't be attributed to anything specific beyond their obvious circumstances. But for the terrorists, who were trying to maintain control and project authority, the effect was far more disruptive. What was happening to them defied everything they knew about combat and control. But the worst was yet to come. "Something feels wrong," Delta muttered into his radio, his Serbian accent thick with concern. Marcus recognized the language immediately, filing away another piece of intelligence about their attackers. "Are you certain about the timeline?" Delta continued, pressing his earpiece with increasing agitation. "Everything proceeds as planned," Alpha replied from across the platform, but his voice carried less conviction than it had moments earlier. Marcus smiled slightly and activated a different system. This frequency was higher, designed to interfere with electronic communications by targeting the specific wavelengths used by tactical radios and cell phones. Within 90 seconds, the terrorists would lose contact with whoever was coordinating their operation from outside the station. What they couldn't have imagined was that their communication breakdown was just the beginning of their problems. Beta was the first to notice the malfunction. "Command is not responding," Beta reported, pressing his earpiece and speaking urgently into his throat microphone. His professional composure was beginning to crack. "Check your equipment," Alpha ordered, but Marcus could hear uncertainty creeping into the team leader's voice. While the terrorists dealt with their technical difficulties, Marcus prepared his next escalation. The violin itself had been extensively modified during his years of service, but exactly how extensively would shock anyone who understood the technology involved. What he was about to demonstrate would rewrite the terrorists' understanding of what a musical instrument could become. Marcus lifted his violin and began to play again. To the hostages around him, it sounded like he was nervously trying to calm himself with familiar music. To anyone with knowledge of what Marcus was really doing, It would have sounded like the opening movement of something that shouldn't exist. But the full scope of his capabilities remained hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed. The piece Marcus played was his own composition, written during his deployment in Syria when his unit faced an impossible situation. Each note corresponded to a specific frequency designed to target different aspects of human physiology and psychology. The opening measures created mild disorientation. The middle sections would induce increasing panic. The finale could cause temporary paralysis in anyone within the direct sound field. "I told you to stop playing!" Alpha shouted, spinning around with his weapon raised toward Marcus. Marcus looked up with apparent confusion and fear, his fingers pausing on the violin strings. "I'm sorry. I thought music might help keep people calm. I can stop if you want." The terrorist stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head dismissively. The disabled musician clearly posed no threat beyond minor annoyance. "Just keep it quiet," Alpha commanded, turning his attention back to the hostages. Marcus nodded obediently and returned to his music, transitioning into the second movement. This section began with a series of ascending tones that seemed harmless enough, but were actually designed to target something the terrorists didn't know could be weaponized. What was happening to their inner ears would be just the beginning of their problems. Beta was the first to show symptoms. He stumbled slightly while moving between hostage groups, catching himself against a support pillar with a confused expression. Gamma followed shortly after, unconsciously raising his hand to his head, as if experiencing a sudden headache. What they were experiencing was beyond their understanding, beyond their training, beyond anything they had ever encountered in combat. And Marcus was just getting started. The beauty of what Marcus was doing was its complete deniability. The targets never realized they were under attack until the effects became overwhelming. To the terrorists, their growing discomfort and disorientation seemed like operational stress. They had no reason to suspect that the disabled street musician playing violin in the corner was systematically destroying their ability to function as a coordinated unit. But Marcus was just getting started. What came next would push these trained killers beyond their breaking point, and they would never understand what was destroying them. Marcus moved into the third movement, increasing both the complexity and power of his assault. The violin's strings vibrated at frequencies that human ears interpreted as classical music, but that actually constituted something far more sinister. Each note had been calculated to exploit vulnerabilities that these terrorists didn't know they possessed. What was happening to their nervous systems would terrify them if they understood the science behind it. The hostages were beginning to feel secondary effects, but Marcus had positioned himself so that they received only the peripheral impact of his attack. They felt increasingly uneasy and disoriented, but not to the degree that would compromise their safety when the situation reached its resolution. Alpha tried to radio his external support again, pressing his communication device with growing frustration. The electronic interference Marcus had generated wasn't just blocking their signals, it was feeding corrupted data back through their equipment, making them think their radios were functioning normally, while actually preventing any meaningful communication with their handlers. "Something is wrong with the entire communications array," Alpha announced to his team, his voice tight with suppressed alarm. "We are proceeding with the backup contingency plan." Marcus continued playing while mentally cataloging the acoustic properties of the subway platform. The tiled walls created excellent resonance for his purposes, amplifying and focusing the sound waves exactly where he needed them. The curved ceiling acted like a parabolic reflector, directing maximum acoustic impact toward the terrorist positions while minimizing exposure to the civilian hostages. The fourth movement introduced subsonic frequencies that targeted the autonomic nervous system. Marcus had learned during his military research that specific low-frequency vibrations could interfere with heart rhythm and respiratory function. Not enough to cause serious medical harm, but sufficient to create severe physical discomfort and significantly impair cognitive function. Delta was the first to show serious distress. He lowered his weapon and pressed both hands to his temples, groaning audibly. His teammates looked at him with growing concern, but their own mounting disorientation prevented them from providing effective assistance. "What is wrong with you?" Alpha demanded, watching his teammate struggle with inexplicable symptoms. "I do not know," Delta replied, his Serbian accent thickening as stress affected his English. "Everything feels wrong, like something is pressing inside my skull." Marcus smiled and transitioned into the fifth movement. This section utilized what his unit had called panic frequencies, specific acoustic patterns that triggered the brain's fight or flight response regardless of the subject's conscious mental state. The effect was initially subtle, building gradually until the targets found themselves in a state of overwhelming anxiety without understanding the cause. The terrorists were about to discover that their worst nightmare wasn't bullets or bombs, it was sound itself. Gamma dropped his weapon entirely, stumbling backward until he hit the tunnel wall. His breathing had become rapid and shallow, and sweat was visible on his forehead despite the cool underground air. The other terrorists were showing similar symptoms: elevated heart rates, dilated pupils, the unmistakable physiological markers of acute stress response. "This is not normal operational stress," Beta declared, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool underground air. "We need to abort the mission immediately." "No," Alpha replied, struggling to maintain his composure as he fought against the mounting psychological pressure. "Something is interfering with our capability. We need to identify and neutralize the source." Marcus kept playing, his expression remaining serene as he worked through the most devastating section of his acoustic composition. The frequency pattern in this movement was designed to overwhelm the brain's ability to process auditory information, creating a cascade effect that disrupted multiple sensory systems simultaneously. The research behind these techniques had been conducted on volunteers from Marcus's own unit, men and women who had agreed to be test subjects in carefully controlled laboratory conditions. Even with protective equipment and medical supervision, the effects had been dramatic. In an uncontrolled environment like the subway platform, with targets who had no idea they were under a sophisticated acoustic attack, the impact would be exponentially more severe. "You!" Alpha gasped, his bloodshot eyes fixing on Marcus and his violin as realization dawned. He raised his weapon with visibly shaking hands. "What are you doing to us?" Marcus looked up with perfect innocence, his bow never stopping its movement across the strings. "Playing music, sir, just like you said, keeping it quiet." But Alpha was beyond rational thought now. The acoustic assault had pushed his stress hormones far beyond normal ranges, flooding his nervous system with adrenaline and cortisol while simultaneously disrupting his brain's ability to process the chemical flood effectively. His training told him to eliminate the threat, but his compromised judgment couldn't properly identify what that threat actually was. What happened next would prove that sometimes the deadliest weapons are the ones you never see coming. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. The sudden explosive noise in the enclosed space provided the acoustic cover he needed for the finale of his sonic weapon. He shifted immediately into the sixth and final movement, a complex frequency pattern that utilized the gunshot's reverb characteristics to amplify and focus his acoustic attack to lethal intensity. What the terrorists experienced next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The effect was immediate and completely overwhelming. All 4 terrorists collapsed within seconds, their weapons clattering uselessly across the platform floor. They weren't unconscious. Acoustic weapons rarely achieved complete incapacitation, but they were utterly helpless, trapped in a state of extreme sensory disruption and physical distress that made any coordinated action impossible. Marcus stood slowly, favoring his prosthetic leg as he walked toward the nearest terrorist. Alpha lay curled in a fetal position, hands pressed desperately over his ears, eyes squeezed shut against phantom lights that his overstimulated nervous system was generating. The man who had seemed so confident and dangerous 20 minutes earlier was now completely helpless, lost in a world of acoustic-induced hallucinations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced to the hostages, his voice calm and reassuring after the chaos they had just witnessed. He stood slowly, favoring his prosthetic leg as he addressed the crowd. "You can call the police now. These men won't be causing any more problems." The platform erupted in confused celebration as people realized they were free. Some ran immediately for the exits, while others pulled out cell phones to call for help. A few approached Marcus with expressions of amazement and gratitude, but he was already packing his violin away with the same methodical care he showed every morning. "How did you do that?" Dr. Martinez asked, her medical training making her more observant than most of the other hostages. She stared at the incapacitated terrorists with professional curiosity. "What happened to them?" Marcus looked at the 4 men with an expression of mild puzzlement, shrugging his shoulders. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "Maybe their equipment malfunctioned. Sometimes electronics don't work properly in subway tunnels." It wasn't technically a lie. Their equipment had malfunctioned. He had simply been the cause of that malfunction. The first police officers arrived 11 minutes later, followed quickly by SWAT teams, federal agents, and emergency medical personnel. Marcus remained seated in his corner, violin case closed, looking for all the world like just another traumatized hostage who had happened to witness extraordinary events. "Mr. Chen, can you tell me what you observed during this incident?" Detective Sarah Chen asked, settling into the chair across from Marcus with her notepad ready. Marcus gave her the story he had mentally prepared during the acoustic assault. "A group of terrorists took hostages," he explained carefully. "Their plans seemed to go wrong somehow, and they all collapsed. I can't explain why it happened." "And you were just playing violin through all of this?" Detective Chen pressed, her expression skeptical. "Music has always helped me deal with stressful situations," Marcus replied, which was completely true. "When I lost my leg in Afghanistan, the doctors said I might never play again. When things get overwhelming, playing violin helps me stay centered and calm." It wasn't technically a lie. Music did help him stay calm. It was simply that his particular style of music also happened to be one of the most sophisticated non-lethal weapon systems ever developed by the United States military. The federal agents took considerably longer to interview him, and their questions were far more pointed and detailed. They wanted to know about his military background, his disability status, his employment history since leaving the service. Marcus answered everything truthfully, while being extremely careful not to volunteer any information about his actual military specialty or the classified nature of his former unit. "According to your military records, you served in a logistics and supply support role," Agent Rodriguez noted, reviewing data on his tablet computer. He looked up at Marcus with professional interest. "Transportation and equipment maintenance?" "That's correct," Marcus confirmed with a modest nod. "Not very exciting work, but someone had to make sure the combat soldiers had what they needed when they needed it." Agent Rodriguez made several more notes and closed his tablet. "Well, Mr. Chen, it appears you were extraordinarily fortunate tonight. If those terrorists' equipment hadn't experienced such a comprehensive failure, this situation could have ended very differently." "I don't feel fortunate," Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "I just feel grateful that everyone made it home safely to their families." The investigation continued for several more hours, as crime scene technicians documented everything and medical personnel evaluated the terrorists. The official report would eventually conclude that the four men had suffered simultaneous equipment failures followed by some kind of group psychological breakdown, possibly triggered by operational stress and the confined environment of the subway platform. But the truth was far more extraordinary than any official report would ever reveal. Marcus was finally released around 2:30 a.m. with instructions to contact the FBI if he remembered any additional details about the incident. He gathered his violin case and made his way slowly up the stairs to street level, his prosthetic leg making the climb more challenging than it would have been years earlier. Outside, the autumn air felt crisp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of the subway platform. Marcus walked several blocks before allowing himself to smile. 3 years and 4 months of playing the role of a harmless street musician had been worth it for tonight alone. The skills he had developed during 12 years of military service weren't as diminished as he had sometimes feared. The violin case felt heavier than usual as he made his way home to his small apartment in Queens. Tomorrow he would return to the same corner in Times Square, set up his folding chair, and play classical music for commuters who dropped coins in his case. They would see exactly what they expected to see. A disabled veteran making the best of difficult circumstances, finding purpose and income through music. But Marcus would remember tonight, and he would be ready if similar circumstances ever arose again. The Army's Acoustic Warfare Division might have been officially disbanded and its existence denied, but its most experienced operative was still in service, disguised as a street musician with a violin and a prosthetic leg. In his apartment that night, Marcus carefully cleaned and maintained his modified violin. The instrument had performed flawlessly, its hidden technology operating exactly as designed despite 3 years of inactivity. He made several minor adjustments to the frequency calibration and updated the software that controlled the acoustic weapon systems. Before going to bed, Marcus reviewed online news coverage of the incident. The media was calling it a mysterious terrorist breakdown and speculating about everything from gas leaks to divine intervention. The authorities were being appropriately tight-lipped about their ongoing investigation, which meant the official explanation would probably involve equipment failure and psychological stress. What none of them would ever suspect was that the resolution had been orchestrated by a street musician who could turn sound waves into weapons more effective than bullets. No one would ever suspect that the resolution had been orchestrated by a street musician who could turn sound waves into weapons more effective than bullets. Marcus's secret would remain perfectly protected by the simple fact that the truth was too extraordinary for anyone to believe. 3 years, 4 months, and 13 days. That's how long Marcus had been playing violin in the subway. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of another day in his cover life, and he looked forward to many more years of providing background music for New York's commuters. After all, you never knew when the city might need the services of an acoustic warfare specialist. And when that time came, Marcus Chen would be ready, violin in hand, sitting in his usual corner of the Times Square subway station, looking like exactly what he appeared to be. A disabled veteran who had found peace through music. But beneath that peaceful exterior lay something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The next evening, Marcus arrived at his usual spot at exactly 6 o'clock p.m., just as he had every day for over 3 years. The same folding chair, the same corner of the platform, the same worn violin case. Commuters flowed past him in their familiar patterns, some dropping coins, others simply enjoying the background music as they waited for their trains. To everyone who saw him, Marcus Chen was exactly what he appeared to be. A disabled veteran making the best of his circumstances through music and the kindness of strangers. They had no idea that the man playing Pachelbel's cannon in the corner was one of the most dangerous individuals in the entire New York subway system. And that was exactly how Marcus preferred it. Did you enjoy this incredible story? If Marcus's hidden talents and acoustic warfare skills amazed you, you're going to love what we have coming next. Show your Samir support. Like this video. If Marcus's secret abilities surprised you, comment below. Which part shocked you the most? Share with friends who love underdog stories with epic plot twists. Never miss a story. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for incredible stories like this, every single day. We bring you fresh, mind-blowing tales of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets daily. Tomorrow's story will feature another character whose appearance deceives everyone around them. What kind of hidden identity story would you like to see next? Drop your ideas in the comments. We read every single one. And your suggestions help shape our future stories. Don't miss tomorrow's incredible reveal. Subscribe now.